home, I had to research and reference the known health and environmental impacts of every ingredient in every material. And I was staggered by the mountains of evidence that existed. And I knew that I really wanted to continue down this path, because I also, in sharing my own story, I had so many people reaching out to me with their own stories of mold illness and problems that are really difficult to fix, that, without ripping out walls and, tearing buildings down.
Well, Zara, I'm really excited to have you here on the Undercover Architect podcast. You and I have, I think we've probably been dancing in each other's online circles for some time. And then, of course, I participated in your recent mini mind, which was really great to connect with you in that way and be able to talk about the things that you've been learning and that I've been learning. And, we've been seeing work in the industry, which is really awesome. I think it's been a really great meeting of minds in terms of our own personal areas of expertise. So it's going to be really great to properly introduce you to the Undercover Architect community, many of whom I'm sure are aware of you in terms of what you do in your work and what you do in social media and those kinds of things to educate not only the industry, but also homeowners. So thank you so much for being here. And I want to just jump straight into asking you firstly about, for those who haven't heard about building biology or understand what's involved in the study of it. And also, I know that your special interest is in building biology around new homes, how you kind of got drawn to building biology, a bit more about what it is, and also, what you've done in terms of furthering your studies overseas and why you made that choice.
Yeah, for sure. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. I've been admiring your work for a long time, and I loved our chats in the mini minds. I'm very, very excited about this chat. So in terms of what building biology is, first of all, it literally means building for life. It's derived from the German words Baubiologie, and it was founded in Germany in the 1970s. And after World War II, there was the need to build a lot of homes really quickly, and the move to synthetic building materials and untried, untested methods of construction. And there was a group of professionals that noticed with that came a significant decline in the health of the population. So building biology was founded by Anton Schneider, PhD, and an electrobiologist called Alfred Hornig. And it really is the study of the relationship between the built environment and the health of the human and our surrounding environment. And the goal is for each of these three things to be in harmony. And it really is unique in its focus on the health of the human. So looking at the way a home is designed, looking at surrounding health hazards, the health impacts of building materials, lighting, water filtration, electromagnetic radiation. It goes really, really deep. And in terms of how I came across it, it was pure stroke of luck. It was 8 years ago. It was 2015. I had just been through my second cancer diagnosis in 2 years. I had breast cancer at age 29 and a melanoma diagnosis at age 31. And I was incredibly lucky in that neither of those cancers had spread. But a few things happened within the months following that second diagnosis. The first was the loss of a really close lifelong friend to breast cancer, which had both our experiences had me asking a lot of questions. And I also had I hadn't had to go through chemo. I'd only had to go through radiation. So the cancer itself and the treatments hadn't made me sick, but I had about 20 plus different symptoms that no doctor was able to really diagnose or pinpoint. And I decided to look into the genetic side of things, and I just happened to find on the internet a naturopath that specialised in that, and she did the longest health history anyone had ever done. 90-minute health history, asked me questions about every building I'd ever lived in throughout my life. And we established that I'm one of the 1 in 4 people that is genetically susceptible to mold. And at that point, she said to me, anytime you move home for the rest of your life, you're going to need to get it assessed by a building biologist. And to be honest, at that point, I was like, this is a bit far-fetched. But I did what she said, and I had my home assessed. And he found that I had slightly elevated levels of mold in the home that I owned, that I was living in Melbourne. But he thought that EMFs were actually the bigger concern for me at that point. But that home wasn't going to be the best for me long term, and I'd be better off living in a warmer climate. So that planted the seed to go and live somewhere warmer than Melbourne. And I spent the subsequent 4 years moving from one Airbnb and rental to the next between Melbourne and Sydney, back and forth, and just couldn't find a building that wasn't water damaged that was going to be a suitable environment for me to be able to heal. So I eventually moved to the Northern Rivers of New South Wales and spent 6 weeks trying to find somewhere to live within 20 minutes of Byron hinterland, and all the places I was, pretty certain had poor ventilation, poor lighting, were going to have mold problems. So I ended up going further afield to Kingscliff because there was a home that had just finished being built. So when I moved in, it was 3 weeks after the builders had handed over the keys. And I thought this was going to be key to getting over mold illness. And I woke up after the first night and I had my eyes were stinging so badly. I had to get out of my house to let it ventilate. I had rash and bouts of nausea for the first few months. So at this point, I really decided I wanted to learn about the materials that were in my home and the impact they were having, and learn about healthy home design and materials so that I can one day build my own healthy home and play my part in the movement for change in the meantime. So I started my studies focusing on home design and building materials here in Australia, and learned some really valuable information and skills, research skills, and was absolutely staggered. I literally was at this desk for about 3 weeks because I had to assess every single material used to build my home. I had to research and reference the known health and environmental impacts of every ingredient in every material. And I was staggered by the mountains of evidence that existed. And I knew that I really wanted to continue down this path because I also, in sharing my own story, I had so many people reaching out to me with their own stories of mold illness and problems that are really difficult to fix, that, without ripping out walls and, tearing buildings down. And I didn't want to do mold testing or EMF testing because I didn't want to go into homes and put myself at risk. And I knew I really wanted to be part of a longer term solution. So that's what led me to study in the US through the Building Biology Institute. And there I had the opportunity to be mentored by two incredible humans, Paula Baker-Laporte, who is an architect and building biologist. She's been designing and built homes for environmentally sensitive people for 30 years, and Stephen Collette, who's in Canada. And he is not only a building biologist, but also he's got expertise in building science. He's a straw bale builder and energy efficiency assessor. So I really got the opportunity to be mentored by people that had not just the building biology expertise, but the design and build side of things as well. And the thing that really I hadn't cottoned onto when I was in Australia was the importance of building science as well in creating a healthier home environment. Building physics was a compulsory subject, and that really opened to my eyes to the importance of things like air tightness in the building envelope and some of the changes that are being made to the National Construction Code in Australia this year.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that run through. It's really interesting to hear. I think that was my experience too, as I started to dive more into learning about how they build and construct and renovate or remodel in America, and pursued my own studies of the American industry. They're very different to Australia in that they don't rely on the cladding as the waterproof lining on the home. The waterproofing actually happens behind the cladding, and they're also dealing with snow and things like that in a lot of climates. And so how water and vapor and temperature impacts the building envelope is a lot more, I suppose, immediate to them than it's ever been to us here in Australia. Yeah. And yet we're dealing with all the same issues that they are. We just handle them in a different way. And we also, I think, I left school in 91 and went straight into architecture. So I've been doing this for a long time. And I remember the climate always being described as something quite gentle in Australia compared to, what happens in the States and in the Northern Hemisphere. But obviously what we're seeing, over the last decade in particular, that our climate's not so gentle. And what's been really fascinating for me as I've been learning more about this is it's actually those that move here from overseas and, Europeans and Americans that come here to Australia and they start renting homes, and then they go, you guys are all living in tents. Like what is this? The houses they're just, I can't do anything to protect myself from the outdoor environment. This house just leaks air nonstop. I'm pumping air conditioning into it and it's just dissipating outside. And they started to question the caliber of homes that we've been building here for years. And then also, of course, I think a lot of original housing in Australia was obviously informed by an English kind of construction methodology and an English climate that wasn't necessarily suited here. We didn't take cues from how Indigenous people built their homes. We took cues from how colonial people built their homes. And so it's really interesting to see it all. I feel like it's all coming to a head, and we've got this really exciting opportunity to avoid some of the things that have happened like in Canada and New Zealand with the leaky building syndrome. You know, I know there's lots in the industry that think that we're going to hit that anyway in Australia, and that's going to be the turning point. I'm hoping, I've got a lot of hope and ambition for the industry that we're actually catching up with this faster and we're learning about this faster. So we'll hopefully avoid it being a really dramatic problem in a lot of industry sectors. I think that there might be some parts of the industry where it will just need to come to that to turn things around, but it's really fascinating. So I'm really excited to sort of be hearing more about your knowledge in this podcast episode. But before we dive into that, I wanted to ask, do you find that the people that seek you out, are they people that have had chronic health conditions, or perhaps they've gone through some life-changing health issue like you did, and they've started to question those things around them, and so they're looking for extra help when they're building or renovating? Or do you feel like this is now starting to inform how a lot of people are doing things preemptively, and so they're thinking, oh yeah, building biologist is who I need on my team?
Yeah, it's the demographic of the people to come to me has completely shifted over the last year or so, which has been really exciting to witness. So initially, people who've been through mold illness, I've had quite a few clients who've been through mold illness, or they've had other health challenges that have led them to question the links between our environment and our health, maybe fertility challenges or a child with health challenges or allergies. But there's also been a number of people that are just doing it proactively. But also my customer base has really evolved from being predominantly women who are embarking on renovations or builds to now predominantly builders that know that this is really important. They need to know in order to improve the quality and the health outcomes for their clients.
I love that. I actually really love that that's happening, because that means to me that, you know, the work that I do obviously with builders in Live Life Build, I know that they're becoming much more aware of the risk that they wear with homes and how those homes are impacting the occupants. And so it's fantastic that they're proactively seeking you out. So that's brilliant.
It's honestly, it's the greatest joy to witness. And yes, they're obviously doing it because, you know, there's a level of responsibility and requirements as part of the changes, but the conversations that happen and just how much they care and how much thought they're putting into, you know, how they can implement this information to improve the outcomes for their clients.
How awesome. So my next question was to ask you how receptive you're finding industry is to the knowledge that you share, and generally that the home does have an impact to be able to help or harm somebody's health that is living in that home. Do you see that receptiveness to that information is still very niche, or do you feel like it's starting to penetrate sort of more mainstream? And how perhaps in the industry here we might compare to, say, you know, what your networks are doing overseas and their receptiveness to it?
I think that I probably have a skewed view of the industry, because the majority of the people I deal with are the people that are open to the information that I'm sharing. But I've definitely noticed a huge shift this year. I have to actually credit the Australian Institute of Architects. I did 2 presentations for their members this year. They were among the highest attendance levels for their webinars ever.
Oh, wow.
The level of engagement, the questions, the comments. To be honest, I was quite apprehensive with how some of my information was going to be received, and I was blown away by the level of receptiveness and engagement. But I am aware that this is only a very small percentage of the industry. And then in terms of regulatory bodies, there's definitely, you know, I've had mixed experiences there. There are some that are definitely not open to this idea yet. And then overseas, I put the feelers out to a network of women in building biology in the US and Europe, and it's definitely very similar. That, like, the awareness around health and our homes is very, very small. It's very niche.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I watched the recording of your lean-in session, which is actually available for anyone to watch on the Australian Institute of Architects website and their YouTube channel, and I'll pop it in the resources for this episode actually, because it was great to sort of see. I was really keen to see what kinds of questions architects were asking you at the end, and I could see too that there was also a little bit of opposition to it. I know that when I see people first learn about this, there can be a certain amount of guilt of it's that whole thing of like, when you know better, you do better, but you've got to deal with the mindset concern of, hang on, how long have I been not knowing and not doing well enough? And what does that mean? If I acknowledge now, I think this is what a lot of industry professionals deal with. If I acknowledge now that I know better and I'm going to change, what's going to happen to all those previous projects and my accountability to those previous projects when I didn't know what I needed to know? And so some people's reaction to that is, I'm just not going to learn, because if I don't know, then I can keep doing what I've been doing. So
I love that you brought this up, because actually there's a builder that said to me on a call last week, he said he was really triggered by some information I shared in our chat group that day. But to his credit, the acknowledgement, I'm feeling triggered because this challenges my belief, my long-held belief about this, but actually got straight on the phone to his supplier, asked for more information. So yeah, what he chose to do with the information that challenged his belief, I was really impressed by, because it is very easy to just go, this is too hard, and just turn a blind eye.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, you obviously see lots of mistakes that people will make around design and building material selection. Can you just take us through some of the most common ones? Because I know that you share a resource on your website about the 5 pillars of a healthy home, which is a really great resource for people to check out. Yeah, I'd just love for you to share with the Undercover Architect community what you see those common mistakes are.
Yeah, for sure. I think a big one that can make a really big difference that I see so often, I'm actually looking out at a roof that is case in point, but flat roofs with no eaves are more susceptible to condensation and mold related problems. Eaves play a really important role in protecting the exterior materials from moisture and diverting water away from the home and away from the foundations. I've seen a mold assessment report. There's a wall on the south side that didn't have eaves, had mold in the bricks, and the rain was seeping into the concrete slab into the home, contributing to elevated airborne mold levels within the home. Other ones, in terms of material choices, I think, and this is where I think builders are finding it challenging to get clients across the line in terms of making the better choices, is, and this isn't necessarily with clients that I've served, residential clients, but yeah, from the building industry professional perspective, is, you know, spending lots of money on tiles and bench tops, things that aren't going to make much of a difference to how the building's going to perform, but not wanting to invest money in good quality insulation. Like, obviously, if you're not going to see the materials that are inside your wall system, then why spend more money on it? But I actually think that that's one of the most important choices that you can make, that's going to not only support thermal comfort, energy efficiency, reduced energy bills, but also your health, the structural integrity, the longevity of your home, the value of your asset. I think it's one of the biggest choices that you can make.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that those are, I do see people really struggle with the stuff that gets hidden, and investing in it in the best possible way. It also can feel quite confusing. Like, I see a lot of my home method members dive into the kind of the conversation of insulation and wall wraps and things like that. And it's why I'm really excited about this season, because I know that this is going to help them sort of navigate a lot of that. But and it's also really exciting to see the changes being made to the National Construction Code to legitimise some of those selections and regulate them a little bit more effectively as well. But you can just get such competing information from all different sources. And if you don't know how to kind of navigate through the greenwashing or the information that looks a certain way but means something else, then it can be really challenging. So I think that in any case, getting some expert input into how you're going to wrap and insulate your home for your climate based on the design and the roof form, as you said, you know, a lot of people struggle to avoid doing flat roofs because they really like that contemporary design, but it does mean that it has an on-flow impact of and consequence of decisions that you need to make about how that roof is constructed and detailed, so that you don't set yourself up for issues long term.
Yeah, and another, just flowing on from that, is that I've seen is a client who had flat roof, roof leaks. The windows and doors hadn't been sealed properly, so there was water coming into the home, but also the ducted aircon system in the flat roof, it couldn't be accessed to be cleaned or maintained. So then that was blowing mold spores around the house. The whole house was declared unlivable. This is a less than 10-year-old house that they had to move out of. So things like that can make a massive difference. Flat window sills, collecting water, garden beds up against the home, resulting in moisture seeping into the home.
Yeah, no, that's a really good tips. I think that if we can dive a bit more into the topic around condensation, mold management, air tightness, those kinds of things, and what some of those misconceptions or concerns that you're seeing or that you might have, particularly about how you're seeing people tackle their building and renovation projects, because I think that, you know, we have a saying in architecture that we've had for decades, which is, you know, airtight, ventilate right. But a lot of people think that, well, then that means that I just need to be able to open windows. There's this whole thing about needing your house to breathe, you know, all of this kind of stuff is a big kind of concept in how people think about their homes. What do you know, this is something that you dive into a lot, obviously from your own personal experience of mold illness and helping homeowners navigate this in their own homes. Can you just, let's dive into it a bit.
Yeah, so I think what people that are embarking on renovations and build need to be aware of is that mold can be and is a problem in new builds. There was a scoping study into condensation in residential builds that was carried out by the University of Tasmania in 2015 that found mold to be a problem in 40% of new buildings in all climate zones in Australia. And I think a big area that is lacking awareness that needs a lot more focus is construction stage practices to reduce mold risk. So I suspect that the flooring in my own home was laid before the concrete slab was fully cured. So then you're getting moisture trapped beneath your flooring. Timber framing and concrete slabs being exposed to months of rain, wall cavities being sealed when the timber's still got a high moisture content or is potentially already contaminated with mold. So moisture is being sealing trapped into the wall system. There's actually a story in the scoping study, which I actually think I think every homeowner and builder should be across the findings of that study. But there's a story of a family that had mold problems and had to move out of their home 4 months after it was built. And this home was built to code. And they had to take the roof off. The insulation was sodden. There wasn't a vapor permeable membrane used. So they had to pay about, I think it was $40,000 in remediation costs. On top of that, they had to move out and pay to rent another home. The doctors told them to move out because everyone in the family developed allergies. The marriage subsequently ended because of all the stress and financial pressure. So mold in new builds can be a significant problem if the right strategies aren't implemented in the design, material choices, and the construction stage.
Yeah, and I think it's you know, that 1 in 4 people being impacted by it. I find that the 1 in 4, they're actually the canary in the coal mine. You know, I've had Alex Stewart on the podcast, and she's a dear friend of mine, and we've talked about this a lot. That just because the 1 in 4 person is impacted by it doesn't mean that it's not having some detrimental effect somewhere on the other 3 out of 4 as well. Definitely. And it's just not showing up as really dramatic symptoms as it does in that 1 in 4 of the population. So, and I think that the greater that we build, the more that we build airtight homes, which we've been doing over the past, several years, we've been getting much better at airtight construction, but that needs to be coupled with strategies about how does your building manager manage moisture when the building is closed up? How do you control the movement of water vapor, through the building envelope? And when we each produce, I think it's 3 to 4 liters of water a day just in our everyday, kind of breathing and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
You can have the best exhausted bathroom, you can have a range hood in your kitchen, all that kind of stuff, but you are still going to be producing vapor on a daily basis, even in the driest of climates.
Yeah.
So how do you detail your building envelope to ensure that it's going to enable that water vapor to move through, be drained to somewhere that isn't going to be problematic? And then also, as you said, those construction checks along the way. One of the things that obviously we were chatting about in your mini mind was the ability to use a moisture meter to test the moisture level of the timber framing during construction before the wall gets wrapped, before the plasterboard lining goes on, so that if you have had the, timber frames can sustain sitting out in rain for a certain period of time, treated timber, but they need to have dried out before they get enclosed in a wall construction. So I think I'm hoping that this change in the National Construction Code is the first in us seeing now some as-built verification processes coming in. And at the very least, I know lots of members of the Undercover Architect community are starting to think about these things and including them contractually so that their builders compelled to do them, things like blower door tests and those kinds of things as they go. So, it's going to be interesting to see. So now, on the National Construction Code, you've obviously been doing loads of research. I know that you've been diving deep into what the changes are and how these changes are going to impact our ability to create more healthy homes. Can you take us through some of the things that excite you about the changes and, what you've been sharing with the industry professionals that you've been teaching?
Yeah, for sure. I have to say that I was bowled over when I saw the scale of the changes. It actually took a few weeks for it to sink in. And when it did, I actually felt quite emotional because when I first made the realization that, I was sick because of my home, I was cast in the loony bin. I had 3 medical specialists at the top of their field that said, what did they say? The health practitioner that told me that I was potentially sick because of mold was scaremongering. They didn't want me to get lost with the mold crowd, the very crowd that I needed the help from to help me get better. So on a personal level, and for everyone who's been through this, is the fact that mold in the built environment contributes to health issues has been acknowledged in our National Construction Code is massive. It means that our voices have been heard and our experiences were real and valid. There was a point in time where I dreamed of living in a tent in the desert so I could get better. And I know that there are Australians who have had to go and live in tents to get better. So this is massive. And in terms of, what it means on a broader level, it's ultimately going to improve the standard of housing in Australia. It's going to improve the value of, homes that are built like this. It's going to improve the value, the longevity of their homes. It's also going to reduce the environmental impact of new builds, because I did some maths on this last year, and last year it was estimated that there was going to be 133,000 homes built in Australia. If 40% of them have to be renovated or knocked down and rebuilt in the next 10 years, that's around 55,000 homes. And the environmental impact of that is about 5.7 tonnes of carbon emissions. And then you think that 1 million tonnes of plasterboard is produced every year in Australia. The environmental cost of 40% of homes having mold problems and having to be knocked down and rebuilt is just creating a huge environmental disaster. So there's so many things to be excited about in terms of these changes and what they mean. And then there's things like simple things like the health impacts of lighting. Like, it's all very well to go and light our homes with lots of LED lights, but making sure it's the right type of lighting. My home is the hideously bright white lights that can disrupt circadian rhythm, melatonin production. Melatonin plays a really important role in regulating excess estrogen, which is linked to breast cancer. So something as simple as making sure we're getting the lighting right in our homes can reduce our cancer risk.